Now, to begin today's webinar, I'd like to acknowledge that as a provincial organization, the Federation operates on the homelands of the Wabanaki people, lands that are unceded and unsurrendered. And our presentation today is, we have two presenters, the Federation's own climate change outreach coordinator, Diane Fargiela, and with her is Chris Higgins at RPF with the YSC Marketing Board. And now I will hand things over to Deanne to start today's webinar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll start with saying a few words on the Climate Smart Woodlot Management Project the Federation has been working on since August 24. So this project is funded by ETF, and its goal is to raise awareness among woodlot owners about climate challenges. And the other goal is to provide woodlot owners with information and advice they need, or to help them make climate smart decisions through their woodlot. So today's webinar is part of that project. We will take a closer look at strategies and ideas for managing woodlots according to climate change. So we are going to start. So first, I'll introduce the Wabanaki Acadian Forest. Then I'll present climate change, and at the end, we'll talk about climate smart woodlot management. So let's kick things off and start with the Wabanaki Acadian Forest. I'm going to talk a bit about this forest and its evolution. So I'll keep calling this forest the Wabanaki Acadian Forest because Wabanaki honors First Nations. Acadian acknowledge the Acadians, the first settlers. If you go to the States, it's known as the New England Forest. So the Wabanaki Acadian Forest covers the Maritimes, and it extends to the northeastern United States. So what's interesting about this forest, it lies between the boreal forest to the north and the deciduous forest to the south. So it's a transition zone between those two ecosystems, and it has a wide range of ecological and environmental conditions. So this is why the Wabanaki Acadian Forest is a unique, diverse, and a very, very rich ecosystem. It is home to many species, including boreal species, as well as temperate species. So we are very lucky here to be surrounded by such a diverse ecosystem. But unfortunately, currently, this ecosystem is in a vulnerable state. But before I explain why, I'm going to step back a little bit in time, and we're just going to explore a bit how this ecosystem has evolved. So I'm not going too far away, just 15,000 years ago. And back then, most of the country was covered by ice. So it's mainly an ice sheet that is called the Laurentide ice sheet. So 15,000 years ago, your woodlot, if you have a woodlot, used to look like something like that. So the little thing in orange, that's the CN tower. So I just wanted to put the CN tower in this image just to give you an idea of the thickness of this ice sheet, the Laurentide ice sheet. And this is compared to the thinnest part of the ice sheet, which was about more or less 1 kilometer, and the thickest areas of the ice sheet were up like more or less 3 kilometers. As you can imagine, those are rough numbers. So after that, the glaciation began along the Bay of Fundy and the Baie des Chaleurs, and so ice started to retreat and vegetation started to grow back. And we had at some point a tundra type ecosystem around here. So it used to look like something like that. So vegetation with bushes everywhere. Then trees started to colonize the area, and different species, including boreal species, dominated the ecosystem. So at some point, we had around us here some kind of boreal species, a boreal forest, sorry. With time, temperature kept increasing and temperate species started to settle. So step by step, the evolution of this ecosystem led to the forest we know today, the forest you know, the Wabanaki Acadian forest. And that's a picture of a stand in New Brunswick. Now, if I want to be a little bit more specific, the ecosystem we see today is not exactly the same as the one witnessed by the first settlers, the Acadians. So we do have some historical descriptions of the Wabanaki Acadian forest. We have descriptions from this person, Nicholas Dennis, who used to be governor. And he explored much of the forest. And he described the Acadian forest with oak, pines, firs of 3 sorts. He was talking about spruce, fir, and hemlock. Also birches, beeches, aspen, maples, and ashes. We also have descriptions from this person, Titus Smith, who can be considered as a pioneer ecologist. So he did a survey of the least frequented parts of Nova Scotia in 1801, 1802, and he reported pine trees 125 to 174 feet tall. So in meters, that would be 38 to 53 meters. It's not frequent to see very, very tall trees nowadays. So overall, back then, the pre-settlement forest was dominated by species such as the one you see on the screen: red spruce, hemlock, sugar maple, white cedar, yellow birch, American beech. White pine, white ash, red oak also were important in this ecosystem, and balsam fir depends where you are, mainly in the north. It used to play an important role in the forest. But as I said earlier, the Wabanaki Acadian forest is in a vulnerable state. Since the arrival of the first settlers in the Maritimes, so human activities, so what also we call anthropogenic activities, have changed the Wabanaki Acadian forest. So timber has been used for heating, construction, shipbuilding. They did send a lot of wood back to England, and other commercial activities. And the land also was valuable for agriculture. So they did use the land for agriculture. So this ecosystem has been under a continuous stress for hundreds of years. And now it has changed. So we still have the same species, but in a different proportions. So this chart illustrates this trend. It's from a study carried out in Kings County in southern New Brunswick. It shows the estimated frequency of major forestry genera in Kings. So around 1800 and in 1993. So what's interesting to note, the distribution of species was more even back then, implying a higher species and ecosystem diversity than is present today. Also, it's good to note that spruce and fir have increased in frequency. They now comprise about 50% of the forest, but 200 years ago, they accounted for about 25% of the forest. So if you want to compare fir to other species, let's say cedar or beech, these species were likely as common as balsam fir back then 200 years ago, which is not the case anymore right now. So that's actually what some scientists call a borealization of the forest. The abundance of boreal species is increasing. And when we think about climate change, this is really far from being the best option if we want to have a resilient forest in the future. And now, just to conclude this part of the presentation, I'd just like to show you a nice video on the Wabanaki Acadian forest that is by Macphail with Ecological Forestry projects. This video was just to conclude the section of the presentation on the Wabanaki Acadian. So now let's focus on climate change. So I'll kick things off with a short-ish definition of climate change. This is the definition of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So to make it shorter, it's IPCC. And IPCC is a United Nations body responsible for assessing the science related to climate change. So according to this definition, climate change refers to a change in the state of the climate that can be identified by changes in the mean and other variability of its properties, and that persists for an extended period, typically decades or long. Climate change may be due to natural internal processes or external forcing, or to persistent anthropogenic changes in the composition of the atmosphere or in land use. So that's a lot of words, but as you can see, the key points are highlighted. So climate change is the change in the state of the climate that persists for an extended period. It can be natural. It can also be anthropogenic. So what's exactly the difference between those two? We'll talk about the natural processes and anthropogenic causes. This is not the first time planet Earth experienced climate change. So for millions of years, we have solar radiation, volcanic activities, Earth's orbit, and other natural factors that have caused variations in the climate. But lately, let's say since the 50s, the temperature has been increasing. So the natural factors I just mentioned are not responsible for the current global warming. Instead, anthropogenic activities since the industrial era are the main cause. Mankind has been releasing very large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So that enhances what we call the greenhouse effect, which leads to higher temperature. So what's exactly the greenhouse effect? Again, I'll show you a short video on the greenhouse effect. It's by Germany's international broadcaster, DW. So to summarize this video, I'll make it very simple. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere trap heat. You add more greenhouse gases, you just trap more heat. The result is this. Temperatures are increasing. So this is a chart from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So it illustrates the current global warming by showing the temperature anomalies since 1850. To understand that chart, actually, it compares the yearly average temperature with the 20th century average of 13.9 Celsius degrees. So for instance, if we take 1850, the global surface temperature back in 1850 was 0.2 Celsius degrees below the 20th century average. That's just to explain how to read that chart. Overall, if you look at it, so you have on the left side, it's mainly blue, and then on the right side, it's mainly red. Before, like the 30s, more or less, the climate was generally cooler. Mid-century, it was more or less even, and then since 77, it's all red. The climate's like it's warmer. Overall, if we're gonna talk about numbers, since 1850, the Earth's temperature has increased by an average of 0.06 Celsius degrees per decade. What's more interesting to look at the past few decades. Over the past few decades, warming has accelerated. It is 3 times faster. And the last thing I'd like to say about this chart, the 10 warmest years on record have all occurred in the last decade. And the gold medal goes to, it's clear, it's 2024, and it's official. 2024 is officially the warmest year on record. Its global surface temperature is 1.29 Celsius degrees above the 20th century average. The last time we had a colder than average year, that was in 76, so 48 years ago. And unfortunately, this trend is not going to stop anytime soon. So the next table I'll show you presents the latest projections. This table is taken from the IPCC 6th assessment report. It presents the changes in global surface temperature by the end of the century for different scenarios. All the value you see in that table are compared to the 1850-1900 average. So we have 5 new potential scenarios. So the one on the left, SSP1 1.9, SSP1 2.6, etc. SSP, it stands for Shared Socioeconomic Pathways. SSPs represent potential pathways that describe how our society might evolve according to population growth, economic development, and other socioeconomic factors. So those SSPs, they are here to complement what we call the representative concentration pathways, to make it easier, RCPs. RCPs were introduced in the previous report of IPCC, and they focus more on the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and radiative forcing. So actually the number you see on the right side, so 1.9, 2.6 in the scenario designation, those numbers represent the approximate level of radiative forcing. What we have here, these new set of scenarios, they just come from a combination between SSPs and RCPs. So now let's take a look at the numbers. So under all these scenarios, the temperature will continue to increase until at least mid-century. So we expect the temperature to increase about 1.5 Celsius degrees during the 21st century. By the end of the century, that's the right side, like on the right side of the table, global warming of 2 Celsius degree would be exceeded under the last 2 scenarios, the high and the very high greenhouse gases emissions scenario. So we expect the temperature to exceed this 2 Celsius degrees difference. If we follow the intermediate scenario, the one in the middle, this is also extremely likely to happen. And 2 degrees, it seems very low. It's just 2 degrees, but that can have a huge impact on the planet, on all the ecosystem, on us. So the question is now, so can we avoid this? Honestly, it's hard to say. Are we going to reduce significantly greenhouse gases emissions? I don't really have an answer to that question. I guess only time will tell. But anyway, global warming is affecting our environment, it's affecting human societies, and it's affecting our economies. There are many impacts, and the impacts of climate change, well, they are diverse. We have ice melt, which leads to sea level rise. We have wildfires, hurricanes, storms, floods, heat waves, drought, and that's not all of them. These impacts are already being observed, and they are expected to intensify in the future. So we expect to have more extreme weather events in the future. So we'll have more frequent and more intense of like everything. So as I said, that has an impact on us, on our ecosystem, on our economies, and also on our forests. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier, and this is an increasing threat to forests. As climate change intensifies the impact of natural disturbances, so such as you have drought, you have strong winds, wildfires, pests, It further increases the vulnerability of forest ecosystems. So these stress factors, they actually can interact together and amplify the overall damage they can cause. So that will lead to greater risks of forest degradation, even that can lead to irreversible damage. So you can just end up at the end with no forest at all. Not gonna lie to you, this is not a very good plan to end up without forests. So that's why we actually are here today and to talk about climate smart woodlot management. So let's dive into the management section now of this presentation. Why climate smart woodlot management? Why it's important to think that way? Just because it sustains the benefits of forests. Forests are very important for us. They provide many services. So they offer environmental benefits, carbon storage, soil conservation, habitats for biodiversity, and others. They also offer economic benefits. So they contribute to our local economy as well as the global economy. So they supply the world's population with wood and other products. And the forestry sector provides jobs and work opportunities. Finally, forests offer cultural and social benefits. So as we know, first, it's a space for us for our activities. It promotes our mental and physical well-being. And forests have also a spiritual significance for many indigenous and local communities. So as you can see, forests are very important, and climate smart management is important to maintain all of these benefits. So what's climate smart management? So we'll go through another definition. That's according to EFI. EFI is the European Forest Institute. So according to EFI, climate smart forestry is a targeted approach or strategy to increase the climate benefits from forests and the forest sector in a way that creates synergies with other needs related to forests. This approach builds on 3 pillars. So 1, reducing and or removing greenhouse gases emissions to mitigate climate change. 2, adapting forest management to build resilient forests. 3, active forest management aiming to sustainably increase productivity and provide all benefits that forests can provide. So in other words, I'll make that simpler. Climate smart forestry will improve the resilience of the forest, its capacity to store carbon, and our productivity, making it more sustainable. The question now people are going to ask, how do we get there? How do we make our forests more resilient, more capable to store carbon? The answer is just one word, one single word, and that word is diversity. In a climate-adapted forestry approach, diversity must be at the heart of any strategy. A diverse forest is better equipped to adapt change. First of all, diversity spreads risks. So if anything happens, like you have a disease or maybe a storm or anything, one part of the tree population will likely be impacted, leaving the other part undamaged. Diversity offers the ecosystem a greater chance of survival. Diversity also plays a crucial role in supporting biodiversity, vegetation, wildlife, fungal species. So it supports biodiversity and maintain the balance of the ecosystem. Diversity also promotes carbon storage. So recent studies suggest that diversity provides considerable advantages when it comes to carbon sequestration. So diverse planted forests to be able to store more carbon than monocultures. And finally, diversity, from an economic perspective, diversity reduces losses. If anything happens, again, if you have more species, your losses will be reduced. Diversity also offers some commercial flexibility. So what I mean when I say commercial flexibility, I'm talking about the timber market. So with climate change, this market is uncertain. Species that are in demand today may no longer be so by the end of the century. Species whose population will be able to adapt to climate change may find their timber increasingly sought after. That's why diversity offers some kind of commercial flexibility for the future, because we're not sure what's going to happen. So the more diverse your forest is, you have more chances to adapt to the changes, the future changes. So overall, diversity is a key factor that contributes to the resilience of forest ecosystems, both ecologically and economically. And now, practically, what you're going to do to make your woodlot more diverse, there's some kind of process to follow, like the main ideas. So step one, knowing your woodlot, which will help you define your goal. Step two, assessing your woodlot to develop a management plan that aligns with your goal. And last step, step three, managing for the future by implementing the management plan. So if you look at the arrows, the last two steps, assessing your woodlot and managing for the future, should be ongoing. After several years, a landowner should reassess his woodlot to evaluate the progress and eventually to adjust the management plan as needed. I don't know, maybe he will have different goals. Maybe we'll have new environmental challenges. So you have to reassess to be able to adjust everything and then continue managing your woodlot. And then after another several years, you'll reassess again and again. That's the things you have to do. And at some point, when the time comes to pass on the woodlot to future generation, well, the best thing to do at that moment is just to transfer all the knowledge to this new generation, because they're gonna start back from the beginning, knowing your woodlot, and then assess and then manage. So that will ensure the continuity of the process and the long-term sustainability of the woodlot. So we're going to talk a little bit about each step. So as we said, knowing your woodlot is the first step in a climate-smart management process. It's important that a woodlot owner take the time to identify what he has. And not only what he has on his woodlot, also he needs to take the time to understand how his woodlot is changing in response to climate change. You know what's the issue, what's the problem, how it's going to evolve, then you can address the problem. So to help you understand how the forest around you is changing, we're going to talk a bit about the species now. And what I'm going to show you is a summary of a review conducted in 2018. This review outlines the findings of 3 studies on the resilience of 3 species in the Wabanaki Acadian forest. So that's like a summary of all 3 studies. So of the species that were investigated, the 23 you see on the screen are projected to have moderate to high resilience to climate change. The one highlighted in red are impacted by a disease or a pest. Just wanted to highlight those species. Generally speaking, boreal species that are adapted to cold climates are expected to decline, whereas temperate species, they should benefit from climate change and they probably will increase. As I said, this is a summary of 3 studies. And these 3 studies, they have come to some kind of consensus that only 9 species will likely preserve in the long term. Those 9 species are like hemlock, eastern white cedar, eastern white pine, red maple, red oak, red spruce, sugar maple, white ash, and yellow bush. Out of these 9 species, 4 are likely to increase in growth and distribution. red maple, red oak, eastern white pine, and white ash. Other species were identified by one or two, but not the three studies, as having moderate to high resilience to climate change, such as American beech, such as butternut or bur oak or other species. But we're now focused on the one we see on the screen. I want you to keep in mind now that the Wabanaki Acadian forest covers over 100,000 square kilometers. The environmental conditions are not the same everywhere. So a species' potential to adapt to future climatic conditions will depend on its location. Also, you have to keep in mind pests and disease. Pests and disease will have an impact on some species and their ability to thrive in a changing climate. So now I'll just hand it over to Chris so he can give you more information on some of the species. So it's up to you now, Chris.
Yeah. So with a lot of these tree species, we are located in the more northern part of their distribution. And with that being said, as the climate changes and we begin to experience warmer summers with more severe drought, for example, these tree species should gain more suitable habitat as their range should push more northward. These tree species as a whole are better able to withstand these events as opposed to our more native tree species, such as balsam fir. And then red spruce is another species that's listed here, where inland they are not expected to fare all too well. However, along the coast and along the Fundy Fog Belt, the spruce is still expected to thrive, as these conditions are quite harsh, and the species of spruce is well adapted to living in these conditions. And I'll give it back to you, Diane.
Thank you, Chris. I'm getting back to you in 30 seconds. So we talked about species that have a moderate to high resilience to climate change. We have other species, unfortunately, that are not going to do well, and one of them is balsam fir, the provincial tree. Balsam fir is one of the species that is not expected to fare well with climate change. So what you see on the screen, this image shows the distribution of balsam fir for current climatic conditions and future conditions. This is PEI. So the white represents unfavorable conditions and potential absence of species, whereas red represent the most favorable conditions. And as you can see, as we go to the end of the century, it gets more and more white. So by the end of the century, balsam fir habitat is projected to persist on only 3.7% of PEI. So as you can see, it's not expected to fare well. Chris, can you please add more information on that?
Absolutely. So with balsam fir, we are located at the southernmost limit of its range. This brings a number of challenges for the tree with the warming climate, as it is a tree that is adapted to grow well in cold environments, and it is not adapted to be able to withstand periods of droughts, and it relies on moisture-rich soils. With our winters and summers becoming warmer with less frequent rains, this poses a significant threat for balsam fir as we move forward with our changing climate. You might even be able to see that throughout the summers as well. You'll just see a sudden fir death on the side of the highway, whereas a week before that same tree was bright green. So you're seeing some of it already. The same is not entirely true for the northern parts of the province, however, as balsam fir is still doing very well, as the winters are still more severe and the summers don't experience the same kinds of heat and drought as the southern part. However, if we look into the future, I think we can kind of predict that the northern part of the province's balsam fir could eventually be experiencing what the balsam fir in the southern part of the province is experiencing in today's climate. And I'll give it back to you, Diane.
Thank you for all this information. So as we said, knowing your Woodlot and how it's changing will help you set a goal. So you need to know what you want if you want to manage your woodlot. Very normal. When you want to do something, you need to know what you want to do. And then when you know what you want, you'll be able to assess your woodlot. An in-depth site assessment can then be conducted to evaluate the woodlot's potential and any associated risks. So this assessment will let you develop a management plan to enhance the resilience of the woodlots. Again, when you'll have a management plan, this will be according to what the landowner wants. At the end, it would always be according to what the woodlot owner wants. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, so when assessing your woodlot, the first step is to find out what exactly are your goals and objectives for your property, as well as knowing the history of your woodlot. Like it may have been cut 40 years ago, for example. Once you have an idea, and it is important to reach out to a forest professional to discuss these ideas, and they can help determine what is feasible. The forest professional can then help you identify what tree species are present, the state of their health and age development, wildlife, and what kinds of soils are present. It is then important to discover if there are any environmentally significant areas on your property, such as a wetland or stream. Finally, it is very important to understand what risks could be present on your property with regards to climate change. Start things off, blowdown can have devastating effects on a property. It is important to keep tabs on what surrounding properties may have been harvested, as this can significantly increase the intensity of wind events. The topography is important to keep in mind, and along with that, it's important to understand whether your woodlot is primarily inhabited by shallow-rooted species, as they are prone to blow down in high wind events. And then to keep it going, fire is becoming more and more of a threat with each passing year. It is important to monitor the fuel load on the ground as well as ladder fuels. These fuels are essentially just dead trees laying on the forest floor or caught up in the canopy, giving a trail to reach the tops of the trees for fire. Diversity is essential in managing for fire. Solid spruce or fir stands will burn hotter and quicker than a hardwood stand. Hardwoods can help break up the fire spread and suppress the fire from burning hotter and getting out of control. Roads are also important to have present on your property, as it gives easy access to responders in the case of a fire. And then finally, insects and disease are very significant threats, as they can pose major threat to both of the issues we just discussed. It's important to prepare for the unknown, as we don't know what pest or disease that may be on the horizon. The best way to prepare is to have as much diversity as possible and to mitigate the spread of such disease of an insect. And in the end, blowdown, fire, insects, and disease are all important factors that need to be at the forefront of thought when we are managing a forest in today's climate. Back to you, Diane.
Thank you. So what I'm going to show you next is a video that's about assessing your forest. So what you will see in this video, you will see a forester going on 3 different stands and assess those stands.
Unfortunately, many of the species that we know and have come to love in the Acadian forest are not expected to fare well under climate change. The biggest thing that I can see for landowners to help in climate change response is to know their forest. But if we don't know that something's happening, we can't address it. And so knowing your land, knowing what you have out there and how it's changing is really important.
The role of the forest professional is to help the landowner or landowners understand, first of all, what it is they have from an ecological perspective. The secondary role of the forest professional, which most people think about, is actively managing a forest. So what's true in the Highlands of Cape Breton isn't necessarily true in Western Nova Scotia, and what's true in that Fundy fog belt is not true here in terms of climate and its effects.
The big thing to think about in the Acadian forest is that most of our tree species can be classified into 3 separate groups. Our boreal species, black spruce, tamarack or larch, also balsam fir, and then a non-conifer, white birch or paper birch. Unfortunately, in this region, these boreal-affiliated species are expected to decline. Our hemiboreal species, this can include white pine, red spruce, our maples, red maple and sugar maple. These hemiboreal species don't have a simple answer to climate change. It depends on how the climate changes, how much it warms, and how much precipitation that we really have. And then our southerly or our temperate species, red oak, American elm, basswood, ironwood, black cherry. Under climate change, we're expecting that many of our southerly species are going to do quite well and increase their population. As we talk about climate change, invasive insects or invasive fungi that are coming from other areas may be better adapted to these future climate regimes, and unfortunately we could see an increase in the number or the damage caused by some of these pests and pathogens. Usually this white mycelial fan is really indicative of armillaria, which is a root rot pathogen, and then it usually comes in through the roots and spreads up. As I've taken the time to study climate change in the Acadian forest, I think the most surprising factor to me is just how much is affected. So if we can get in at the ground level and manage our forests to help improve or become more resilient to climate change, that's the best option we have, because we know it's coming. We know climate change is going to happen. So let's do what we can to protect our forests and protect every other component that's involved with our forests and with climate change.
So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to visit 3 different stands from the point of view of assessing their risk associated with projected climate change. The stand we're going to start with is this stand. This is a natural, late successional black spruce forest. As a general principle, naturally occurring black spruce forests grow on very nutrient poor, very unproductive sites. Certainly not somewhere you'd want to grow your tomatoes. We have black spruce both dominating the canopy here, if we look up, and we have black spruce seedlings regenerating in partial shade. So as far as assessing site, the starting point is always assessing soil. The relevance of soils is about site capability and site productivity. With each sample, one needs to not only look at the color of the soil, but also is the texture of the soil. So more than 50% sand and less than 20% clay. So this is actually a forested wetland, is what this is. The reality is that the reason why black spruce dominates here is because the growing conditions are so poor that nothing else really grows here. So in terms of assessing black spruce risk associated with climate change, because of black spruce's obvious adaptation to very cold boreal climates, the further north we move and or the further higher up we go, right, in terms of elevation, the less risky black spruce is related to climate change. So at what point does the climate become unsuitable to black spruce? Or do we get to the point where there are other species that are more competitive due to a climate shift? I mean, black spruce is not a competitive species, right? And it's not a fast-growing species. So my gut would tell me that the southern limit of black spruce isn't a climate function. It's actually a competition function. I think there are other species further south that grow better than black spruce in those climates and outcompete it. And certainly this is going to remain naturally black spruce dominated, you know, without somebody doing something drastic to it for a very long time. And will these trees suffer and grow slower as a result of climate change? Remember that black spruce is not only tolerant of wet soils, it's also tolerant of drought. Makes it a difficult stand to assess in terms of climate change. The irony in this is that although this is a boreal looking and a boreal kind of forest, and we almost want to call it a boreal forest, which it's not, to me this is less risk than if this was balsam fir, for example, or even red spruce. I think that pure red spruce stands outside of that ideal climate are at high risk of climate change. Now we find ourselves in a mixed wood stand. And in this case, we have red maple, yellow birch, some white birch, the occasional ash, and spruce fir. So balsam fir and the occasional red spruce. See, there's balsam fir everywhere. So historically, people have selectively logged these stands primarily for their softwood potential, right? Historically, people weren't hunting for red maple trees. They were hunting for big spruce. Yeah, so this is red spruce, right? Not black. And although this is a valuable, long-lived tree, it is not predicted to do well in the next 100 years as the climate warms, especially not here. It's certainly rocky. As in very rocky. This is a different soil type than the black spruce stand we're in. This is actually a fine textured soil with about just over 20% clay. This is medium, nutrient medium, and the moisture regime is fresh. From a climate change perspective, we have species here that are already well adapted to the changing climate, red maple being the prime example, you know, almost the eastern forest super tree. It would be fair to assume that as the climate changes over the next century, the climate here is going to become more and more favorable to red maple. Balsam fir, on the other hand, is a late successional component of the forest, meaning that it will regenerate in the shade, it will dominate the understory, it will become periodically dominant components of the canopy. It is very susceptible to all kinds of insects and disease, and will become more and more stressed as a result of climate change. Because unlike black spruce, balsam fir is sensitive to climate change, sensitive to extremes in weather, and it's susceptible to all kinds of disease and insects. And we are certainly at the southern limit of balsam fir's range in this part of the world. So based on my assessment of this stand in terms of climate change risk, I would rate this at least medium risk associated with climate change. And if I look at the ingrowth in this stand, if you were not to manage this stand, the amount of balsam fir in this stand is actually going to increase. Without treatment, could become higher and higher risk over time, for sure. Now we find ourselves in a balsam fir dominated forest. Very typical and very common forest type throughout our entire region of the Maritimes. And not only is the canopy dominated by balsam fir here, but the regeneration layer that's developing in this young stand is dominated by balsam fir as well. They're either the result of stands that naturally succeed to balsam fir dominance, depending on where you are, or in the case of this, they can actually be a result of early silvicultural intervention where the hardwood component has been taken out, resulting in an almost pure balsam fir dominated stand. Left to its own devices, this stand will continue to age, continue to become dominated by fewer and fewer larger trees. It's not a rich site, so there's no reasonable reason to think that this is going to succeed towards mixed wood or hardwood. Old balsam fir stands, unless they're in very sheltered sites, become more and more susceptible to wind events. But even if the canopy was blown down in this stand, if the regeneration layer is already established to balsam fir, they'll just sit there waiting for light and take over the stand again. Balsam fir is also naturally susceptible to a wide range of natural insects and disease, the most famous of which is the spruce budworm. But it's also very poor at compartmentalizing rot. It's prone to butt and root rots, and it's not tolerant of environmental extremes. In my assessment, this is a high-risk stand because balsam fir is highly susceptible to the predicted climate changes that are coming. The degree of risk associated with balsam fir currently and even over the next 50 years or more is largely due to where you are. So we could be in a balsam fir dominated stand in Madawaska County in northwestern New Brunswick, and balsam fir is still a fairly prized tree and grows very well, and also at higher elevations. So in terms of managing for climate change and mitigating against it, understanding what you have and what its potential is always the first question. What is its potential? What's growing there? What could grow there? What you could manage for? What you couldn't manage for? Like the extreme example. I once had a woodlot owner that wanted a sugar bush, but he owned a black spruce forest, and I had to tell him, "You're never going to grow sugar maple there." And he actually went and bought a new woodlot.
So I hope you enjoyed this video. Before we head to the last step of the process, like the managing part of the process, so the last thing I would like to add on this part, the step assessing the forest, it's actually a tool. I would like to introduce you the climate change adaptive silviculture prescription tool. You actually can use it to assess your woodlot. It was actually created by Gareth Davis. This is the forester you saw in the video. The goal of this tool, there are two primary goals: the resilience of the forest as well as carbon storage. So this tool can help you assess your woodlot and define a treatment. So how it works, it's a decision tree based guide. So actually you have a series of questions where you'll answer yes or no. So based on your answers, the tool will direct you to the next relevant question. And then you go on, and at some point at the end, you'll receive a treatment recommendation. It will always start with the question you have on the screen: is the stand dominated by a single affected age? So let's say if you say yes, that will guide you, that will tell you to go to key 2. You go to key 2, you have more questions, and you go through the question, you say yes and no, you keep going, and at the end you end up with a recommended treatment like the one you see on the screen in the orange box. Just keep in mind that this tool will not, it's not meant to replace a professional assessment. It's merely here to guide you, and it will make you think. Sometimes not necessarily easy to answer some question to say if it's yes or no. So in a way that will make you think. So yeah, that was the last thing I wanted to say on assessing your woodlot. So when you're done with it and then you have your management plan, that's when you have to start managing for the future. And again, I'll let Chris talk about this step of the process.
Yeah. So once you have your management plan completed, it is important to identify the actions that need to happen to ensure you have a healthy woodlot moving forward. One thing each landowner should be doing is keeping tabs on the health of the trees and monitoring for different pests and disease on their woodlot. And if there is something that looks alarming, contact a forest professional to come and help identify what the problem may be. And then they can help with the ensuing steps to help get rid of the pest or disease at hand. For example, maybe you have some declining in health trees present and they are starting to blow over. This provides an opportunity to remove these trees from your woodlot and help encourage some more climate adaptive species. When doing this, it is important to have a reputable contractor do the work. They can remove these trees. By doing so, this opens up the canopy, and this gives the opportunity for more climate adaptive seed sources to establish in the opening. And if there aren't desirable species present, this can be done by planting some different climate adaptive hardwoods and softwood trees. And keeping a climate adaptive woodlot can only be accomplished through constant monitoring and adaptability by thinking outside the box and keeping up to date with current forest issues and concerns. And then finally, with managing for the future, it is important to surround yourself with reputable people, whether that is someone from a marketing board, a watershed association, the Nature Trust, or a conservation group. Each group can give a different perspective with the goal of growing a healthy and productive forest for the future. And that's what I have for there.
Thank you, Chris. So yeah, we're done with the whole process. We went through everything. Now you have to keep in mind that you're not on your own. So there are many professionals in the forestry sector that are ready to assist you. So if you're not sure who to call, what to do, what's your next step, you can find out who to contact by contacting the Nouveau-Brunswick Federation of Woodlot owners. The Federation collaborates with government departments, marketing board, and as well as other organizations. So the Federation can guide you. Just need a phone call, an email if you prefer. It's just to start somewhere and establish contact. We can guide you and let you know who to contact in case you want to start and do something on your woodlot. To conclude, actually my conclusion is very, very simple, and I want to keep it to one word, one single word, and that word is diversity. For me, it's the key takeaway from this project, from this webinar, from this presentation. That's it. Thank you all for your attention. And if you have questions, we have time to answer some questions. And if you'd like to contact us, so you have both our emails on the screen if you need more information or have more questions. There we go.
There are a couple of questions in the chat box, if you guys could hold on. We are scheduled to finish at about 3:15, so we have about 5 minutes that we can try and get through. First question was for Alan. I may have to get Alan to clarify his question, though. The only trees that are readily available are white spruce. That is the species that is grown or planned to be grown. That species will thrive in coastal areas. What species is going to be available for planting, and what marketability is there for those species? As I'm in the middle of the province, what would you suggest I do with red and white spruce monocultures?
Yeah, so I can do my best to try and answer that. As of right now, spruce, you're okay at the moment. You might even get like another full turn out of it. It's just moving forward, it's important to increase that diversity from a monoculture, maybe bring in, try and encourage more red maples, yellow birch, white pine, and those are trees that we can get as seedlings and can plant in those gaps, or if you clear cut, we can plant it with a diversity of hardwoods and softwoods that are supposed to do well with climate change. And yeah, and if you'd like to talk more about that, you can send an email out to me and I can discuss further.
Okay, that's good. Dean just wanted a clarification on one of the slides, Deanne. You asked what's the difference between the species in the yellow circles compared to the ones in the brown circles. He just missed it, that's all. I think the ones in your yellow circles were the ones expected to do
This one.
that one.
So yeah, those 9 species were identified by like the 3 studies I was talking about as having moderate to high resilience to climate change. And out of those 9 species, the 4 that are in yellow are likely to increase in growth and distribution. Red maple, red oak, white ash, and white pine. I hope that answered the question.
If not, I'm sure he'll speak up. Hazen has a question. He's got a few large hardwood that appear to over-mature. Their growth rings are now small and they choke the floor. Is it better to cut and plant oak or other resilient hardwoods?
Okay, I have a few large hardwood that appear more mature. Their growth rates are small. Showed before. That's kind of up to the landowner at the end of the day. Having big mature trees, as long as they aren't dying, could be alive for the foreseeable future, and like they're gonna spread seed, so they're good seed trees to have. And even if they do die, they present really great snag tree opportunities that are great for wildlife. Um, but if you were to cut them, planting oak is a great species to replace such a tree. Yeah.
Quite a few comments in the chat, thanking you both, by the way. Another question is, with climate change, what non-native species could be planted that would replace species that will suffer from climate change?
My personal opinion on that would be to not plant non-native species, as we don't know what issues that could bring. It's just like when you like Japanese knotweed, for example, was introduced, and now it's just proliferating all over the place, and it's just taking over habitat. I would let climate change kind of introduce new species if it's going to. Like as we move forward, the climate changing, things are going to move up from the States into Canada. So I would let it happen naturally rather than try and encourage them right off the yourself personally.
All the questions we have in the chat at the moment. Is there anyone? Brent, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
No, I did not. Sorry about that.
No, okay. I think that's all the questions for today, and it's 3:15, so we've finished just in time. I do want to thank Deanne and Chris for the presentation today, and I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. And we hope that you'll join us again for future webinars and project events that we hold. This webinar is being recorded, so we will be sharing it on the website in the near future. You can learn more about the Federation and the work we do on our webpage, www.nbwoodlotowners.ca, or by following us on any of our social medias. And we hope everyone has a great day. Thank you very much. Bye, guys.